Welcome once again to the Only You and Solo 2 English version of the podcast. Vince here in studio and Dr. Tino in his office. Please like, subscribe, and share as usual. Uh, Today's topic is going to be one that probably needs a little bit of explanation from the doctor, and that is the topic of narcissism. We hear that term used all the time. This guy's a narcissist, I'm a narcissist, whatever it is. And I don't think people really have good handle on what that is, and of course, more so, really, the handle on whether what it is as a character trait versus an actual disorder. Could you shed some light on that for us, please?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Vince. Welcome back, everybody. This is going to be a continuation of our anger podcast because we're going to try to focus narcissism in the context of narcissism at, let's call it nuclear anger, right? So we'll get to that. But it's very important for everybody to understand personality because we all have one, right? So, what is the difference between personality and an abnormal personality? And that's a challenge to explain sometimes because this may come to a surprise to a lot of people. We've never defined what's normal, right? So, there's no such a thing as a normal personality. So, how do we know what's abnormal when we don't know what's normal, right? So, if you look at personality disorders or personality types, you're going to see all kinds of different things. You're going to see avoidant personality, you're going to see obsessive and compulsive personality, you're going to see dependent personality, schizoid is schizotypal, narcissistic, borderline, antisocial. So the best way I can tell you what normal is all of those things in good balance, meaning understanding the purpose of personality. And personality as a as serves a purpose. It allows us to protect ourselves from whatever life is throwing at us. And
Mhm.
it actually has two components. All those things that I mentioned before, which are character traits or personality traits, and temperament. So, temperament is the clay that we're born with. Okay, we're born being certain way. If you go to a nursery and line up 10 different newborns at the same day, each one is going to have little different temperament. Some of them are very rowdy, some of them are crying all the time, some are logs and never move, some are hungry all the time, some are very nervous and jumpy. So that temperament is your clay. You develop a personality by molding that temperament based on your life experiences, meaning experiences growing up, attachment to your parents, rejection from your parents, abuse, neglect, being over cared for, being overprotected, whatever experiences you had growing up until the age around 26, 25, 26, is going to develop a way of dealing with the world, right? And we call that a personality. So, for example, sometimes we have a need to be dependent and we utilize those traits. Sometimes we have to be avoidant. Sometimes we have to be a little antisocial. Sometimes we have to be a little self centered and narcissistic, right? So, if life is throwing different challenges at us, and we deal with them in a well adapted way based on the different traits we have, then we can say that we're balanced, right? We're normal. That will be a normal personality. So, what's an abnormal personality? Is when one of those traits is very intense, is very predictable, okay, meaning that it comes back a lot, and it affects your functioning in terms of relationships within yourself and the rest of the world, right? So, intensity, frequency, and impact on your life functioning. So, we call it a disorder, not because it's an illness, but because it's so intense, so frequent, so predictable that really affects your ability to relate to the world, right? So, for example, an avoidant personality disorder will be someone who primarily deals with life by avoiding socialization, avoiding interaction, right? Somebody who's schizoid is somebody who avoids the world by not needing the world. So they're very comfortable not needing anybody, right? So in each one of the different personalities has their own traits. Now, we're going to talk about narcissistic personality, and it can be a personality trait, meaning that you frequently react in a narcissistic way, to different aspects of life, or can be
Can,
a disorder so intense that it creates a lot of problems for you.
can you define narcissism for the audience, please?
Well, narcissism is something we all have some of, right? But it basically is an inflated and exaggerated sense of self importance, right? Basically, you feel that you are the center of the universe. Not only that, that you expect to be recognized, okay, for those achievements and talents that you believe you have.
Whether
And
real or not.
exactly, well, you believe you have them, right? So your attitude is that you entitle to an excessive and constant admiration from other people, right? So you have a lot of preoccupation with being successful. You may believe that you're superior to other people, but you're also very envious, okay, of other people. And at the same time, you believe that everybody else is envious of you.
Mm.
You are very self-centered in the sense that you're not able to recognize, okay, the needs of other people, meaning that only your needs are important. And in other words, you're consistently and predictably arrogant, if you may,
And
right?
what's the distinct difference between like just someone being just totally egoistic or egotistical?
Well, egotistical is kind of translating some concepts of psychoanalysis like ego and make it an inflated. So that would be a different way of describing some aspects of narcissism. But narcissism is a complex set of manifestations, self centeredness, feeling of entitlement. You expect the special favors, you feel that you're entitled to when there's a line to get to the movies, to get in the front of of the line just because you are you, right?
Mm.
So these people become very demanding and they become very impatient. And they have a lot of problems relating to other people. They're not easy people to be with, right? So because of that, they end up having a lot of interpersonal problems, whether it's with people around them, their families, their friends, work, relationships, right? Because in a way, they're never wrong
Mm.
because they're entitled to being right. So that becomes quite problematic.
And then in their pursuit, or I guess their belief system, but also the pursuit of getting all those benefits that they think they truly believe they desire, when they don't get it, is that where the anger is manifested, or is there a different association with anger and narcissism?
In order to understand narcissism, you need to understand the dynamics and the psychology of narcissism, meaning what's underneath a narcissist, right? Because why the need to be so entitled? Why the need to be so have so much of a need to be recognized? Where is the grandiosity coming from? And underneath, people who are narcissists, they're actually defending themselves in a grandiose way from anybody getting close to them,
Mhm.
right? So why consciously or unconsciously they're behaving this way is because that underneath the narcissism is a very empty person, is a very weak person that is almost panicked at the idea that somebody will recognize their weakness if there's any. And it's not necessarily that they're weak, but they have developed this way of coping with life that they don't trust anybody with their inner feelings.
And obviously that's going to affect their interpersonal relationships, but how does it affect their internal relationship with themselves? Are they aware of it? Is that where the again, is that where the anger comes from?
No, I'll get to the anger in a minute, but you see, think of it as somebody who's so empty that it has to create an image of grandiosity and of having the best of everything to protect themselves from anybody seeing their emptiness, right? So, what happens when they get challenged or they get criticized or ridiculed, right? Then they react with extreme rage.
Mm.
They react with extreme rage because they become very vulnerable. And it's that moment in somebody with serious narcissism that the rage can become tremendously destructive. Why is that? Because the person who has shamed them, okay, think of it as underneath there's shame, the person who shames them becomes very threatening to them and they have to destroy it.
Mm.
Right. So, and I think we used this example before in one of our programs when a narcissist walks into a room and finds his significant other in bed with another person, whether it's a man or a woman, right? Becomes enraged and attacks them both, right? Seriously. Could kill them, right? And if you process with them afterwards and you ask them, why so much rage? Why not just walking away, right? Why are you destroying your life,
Mm.
you know, with so blindly rageful attack? And they will tell you because they did it to me, right? So it is the ultimate challenge to their self-importance. So they will tell you, don't you understand who I am and who you're doing this to? And we have probably all heard those words from other people, right? How dare you do this to me? Don't you know who I am?
Mm.
So that is a reflection of a lot of emptiness, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that we go on living our lives challenging narcissists, okay? that
Probably not
could
a good piece of advice.
that could be dangerous. I mean, if you're in a narcissistic relationship, I mean, if you're in a toxic relationship with somebody who's a narcissist, the best thing you can do is to move away, move on with your life, right? Because there is no way that you can take on the challenge of fixing that,
Mm.
right? Why is that? Because most patients with narcissistic personality problems are not aware of them being narcissistic. That's their normalcy. So, in order for somebody to really get into the process of wanting to improve themselves, decrease the intensity of their narcissism, and become more adaptive, it requires that they really accept that there is a problem.
And that sounds like it'd be a pretty significant step for somebody who is a narcissist,
Well, it is
because
it is
it
it
opens
is
up
very difficult.
vulnerability. Correct? I mean, they
It
have
is
to be.
very difficult. Most of the approaches psychologically to deal with somebody with narcissistic personality are psychoanalytically based and they're very lengthy treatments. And most of the time, the initial treatment of somebody with a narcissistic personality disorder, we call it MPD, it really requires a very big incentive, right? They sometimes the patient will be motivated by losing somebody very close to them or losing a job or losing status or something that motivates them, but very seldom is because they recognize that there's a problem with them.
Mm. I mean,
Now,
they're almost incapable of it, really.
well, because they're not aware of it. All of these issues that happen with personality intensity are unconscious issues. These are patterns of development, and not unusually, um, these type of disorders in one hand come biologically based. It runs in families. That's
Mm.
one side, and you can say you were born with the traits temperamentally, or you learned the traits at home, right? So you can say that narcissistic personality disorder parents may engender narcissistic personality children, but it can be a biological component too. There are a lot of other comorbid conditions that come together with narcissistic personality disorder, like major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety, perfectionism. There are a number of different things that come together. And not everybody who has narcissistic personality disorder is necessarily dysfunctional, okay? Because they can find adaptiveness in certain environments. They may find environments where they're actually admired, where they actually recognized as if they were gods. They may actually be recognized as having a lot of importance, right? So it becomes like they find their niche, they find their mirror, right?
Sounds like a lot of those people would want to be media folks, potentially politicians, celebrity. Are they attracted to that, or are those people who are in that world where they are being treated godlike? Uh, is it that's just a response to it, or are people attracted to that profession if they're trying to find, or those professions if they're trying to find a safe place to be a narcissist where it's actually beneficial?
Well, it can be adaptive in some places if it's only at the level of traits and not necessarily a disorder. I mean, most people with narcissistic personality disorder will have limited options, right? You see, eventually, whether it's in art or movies or music or professions, you can have some air of self-importance and grandiosity to a certain degree, but eventually will get you in trouble, right? So you have to be able to modulate. Remember what I said at the beginning, we all have narcissism. It's not an issue of having it or not, it's how much and how adaptive or inadaptive it is. But when it gets to the level of intensity for disorder, very few people make it because eventually you become very isolated, right? Uh, there are, cases in which narcissism, especially at the level of disorder, can get delusional, right?
Mm.
Where people get an exaggerated sense of self, starting to believe that they're closer to God or that they can do things that other people can't do. And you start getting into having to separate that from bipolar disorder and manic, for example, right? But I've seen people who are involved as leaders of cults that have significant, serious narcissistic personality issues that we have to be able to recognize because these people react with significant rage. And if they have power, they can be rageful in kind of a contagious ways to
Mm.
the people who are following them. So we have to be very careful with that because that goes beyond the idea of adapting or taking advantage consciously of your self importance to the point of becoming delusional in large groups.
So cult leaders, people of that sort, tend to have significant narcissistic tendencies, but
Well,
do they
yeah,
have narcissistic disorder?
yeah, most likely they do, and some of them are delusional. Some of them are just purely psychotic. Uh, so we have to be able to recognize that because uh, it can be very enticing to follow a narcissist, right? Because you get contagious by the idea that I'm part of something big, I'm part of something very important, without the understanding that it can be also self-destructive, right? So we've seen, I mean, um, we've seen some cults in which people end up killing themselves, right?
Jim Jones.
Jim Jones, follow the leader, right? And you literally follow people to death, and that is not healthy. That dying for somebody else is never healthy.
So you mentioned that the anger issue, but I want a second point I want definitely want you to cover is how do we recognize the narcissist?
Um, it usually takes time, and it takes time because these people are very charming and they're very enticing. They're fun to be with initially until you get into more close relationship with them, and they start reacting to you in entitled ways, and then just start showing their anger and frustration, right? So, but the most important thing is that they're very aloof to your needs, right?
Mm.
I mean, they're very self-centered in terms of what they want from you. But when you start talking about what you want from them, they look at you like, what's wrong with you?
Hmm.
I mean, you have me, and that should be enough, right? I mean, basically, that's
Wow.
the attitude. I mean, that's the attitude of an NPD. Don't you understand who I am? You have me. I've chosen to be with you. You should be thankful.
Wow.
So don't ask me to be empathic to your suffering or your emotional needs or anything like that. They're terribly unempathic to anybody else's needs but their own.
Hmm. And again, is that where that anger comes from when they're not being fulfilled, when those needs from the other person, or are they just really so aloof to it it doesn't matter? So again, where how does that anger come into play?
Well, the anger comes when you start saying, uh, okay, so you don't understand or are sensitive to my needs, so I'm leaving, right?
Hmm.
And that's when the problem starts because how dare you leave me? It starts with, again, you don't know who I am, you know, you should be thankful. How dare you leave me? And if you decide to leave, they become enraged because you have become part of them, right? You belong to me and you can't belong to anybody else. And it cascade down from there. So it becomes, I mean, these people just won't let you go. They just won't let you go. I mean, and to the point that is detrimental to them, right? So they become obsessed with the idea of you not leaving
Hmm.
because they perceive you as an object, your property, right? And you have no needs. The only need you should have is them. So that becomes terribly toxic, right? So leaving these individuals with serious narcissistic personality disorder is a challenge, right?
Is that why in the news, and many stories, I'm thinking just over time, we always hear about the spouse maybe killing the other spouse or even the kids sometimes because you find out later they had marital problems and that spouse, the other or the significant other, was actually in the process of trying to leave that person.
Well, there are different scenarios in that situation. I don't think that we can exclusively say that it is narcissistic personality disorder because there are other potential situations like um, domestic violence, substance abuse, and delusional thinking, right? Um, you want to leave me because you're trying to uh, go out of here and go to the other side and help them get rid of me, right? So I have to get rid of you. So there's all kinds of distortions of reality that can happen. In the narcissistic personality itself, though, is usually more limited to the rage that is associated with somebody either criticizing you too much or rejecting you too much.
Hmm.
Now, those are not the only personalities that deal with sensitivity to rejection or criticism. They're the most obvious ones. But there are other type of personality like borderline personality or antisocial personality that actually together with narcissistic personalities are the most toxic ones, right? In terms of interpersonal relationships.
So it can be exacerbated with other issues as well.
Yeah, and not unusually, persons with this type of personality, especially with narcissistic personality, would have significant issues with regulating their emotions and behaviors. So sometimes they're very moody. You don't know why they're so moody. Sometimes they're easily angered. Uh, they don't handle stress very well,
Hmm.
right? So they tend to move the stress to other people. So other people handle the stress for them. Uh, if they feel if they feel they're not being perfect, let's say they have a job and they have a task and they fail at the task, they get very depressed. I mean, they can get severely withdrawn because of that, to the point that it becomes almost irrational because the perfectionistic task wasn't critical, right? So it was something that was menial, but for them was they fail and they're not supposed to fail because they're perfect, right?
Hmm.
So any failure kind of opens the door for people to see their emptiness. And that's very threatening to them. So underneath, they're very insecure. They have a lot of feelings of shame. They have a lot of feelings of vulnerability. They're very sensitive to humiliation. So they're always showing this facade of perfectionism.
And what is distinctly different, if there is one, with malignant narcissism? We've heard that term in the last couple of years out in the news. What is that specifically?
Well, malignant narcissism is basically talking about the extreme reactions of rage and anger and violence that you see in somebody. But I would have to say that anybody who has an extreme level of narcissism, uh, to the point of being a disorder, can potentially have malignant narcissism. I think that we tend to use malignant narcissism sometimes to describe the extremes, but we have to think in terms of anybody with narcissistic personality disorder has the potential to have malignant reactions and malignant type of behaviors under the right or wrong circumstances.
So, if somebody out there is listening, and I'm sure we all a little bit are saying, sounds a little like me at times. But if someone out there is listening and saying, okay, that is kind of the nail on the head, what are the first steps for somebody like that to find help?
Well, you see, you need to understand. I'm a physician, right? And I went to medical school and specialty training. Just by the fact of having developed some skills that most people don't have, makes you behave in narcissistic ways sometimes. And I can tell you that during my career, and I've been doing this since 1985, in Arizona since 1988. There were times when I could catch myself reacting narcissistically, right? Like, how dare you question my advice, right? So growth teaches you to learn about yourself. So what is important though is that we need to be able to recognize when we're acting in narcissistic ways. It is our responsibility. It's not that somebody else should um, be correcting us or telling us, right? We have to train ourselves to recognize when we're getting out of control. Let me give you an example. I was probably 5 years into my career. um, I was speeding in my car, right? And because I was going to a hospital, I had somewhat of an emergency that wasn't that big of an emergency. And I get stopped for speeding, right? And I threw a tantrum. I threw a tantrum with the police officer. He still gave me a ticket, right? But I would tell him, you don't know who I am. I'm the medical director of blah blah blah, and I'm going to an emergency. How dare you stop me, right? I felt so ashamed afterwards. I actually had to send the police officer a letter of apology, right? And that was a learning lesson for me, that you have to recognize your shortcomings. Is when
Mhm.
you start recognizing your shortcomings, whether it's narcissistic or avoidant or antisocial, whatever it is, you have to recognize it and you have to try to correct it because you have to learn from it. We're all capable of that. I'm not perfect, but I think I'm getting better at recognizing when I'm starting to get frustrated because somebody's not recognizing my authority or somebody's not recognizing that I'm the doctor. So I learned to listen more and talk less, right? And be in touch with what I'm feeling during a certain circumstance. Under extreme circumstances, we're always going to show the worst of us. We're always going to
Of
do
course.
that. Now, in order for people to recognize, okay, that somebody's acting narcissistically, you have to start looking for the lack of connection emotionally. When you're somebody who we have this ability as humans to recognize connection, right? And when you start feeling that the person doesn't have any need for you, okay, but you start feeling in, enticed by how much they tell you they need you or how
Yeah.
much they need you to recognize them, those are red flags, right? Because you're not going to get anything in return. Now, I think the ideal relationship is when the two people want to be together, but they don't need each other too much. When you start having too much need, that kind of slaves you. And what the narcissist does is he slaves you to them,
Mm.
right? And then you find it almost difficult to leave, right? How can I leave this guy? He's been the center of my universe. The second thing that happens, they start isolating you, okay, from anybody who will raise the question about their value, okay? So you start becoming their property. So you have to get those red flags because you have it's a lot of fun at the beginning to be with a narcissist, but it doesn't last very long. And once you become isolated for the rest of the world, you don't know what to do with your life.
Mm. And it sounds like the exit strategy has to be looked at specifically as well because it could potentially be dangerous to you if you leave too abruptly. Is that correct?
Exactly. So what happens? I think that people should leave abruptly, but they have to have a plan. They don't just do it impulsively, but they leave with a plan, right? Um, and they have to be taking safety steps because you don't never know how malignant that person can be. But it's important that you recognize, okay, look at what assets you have, and always, and this is for any personality, nobody is more important than you in the relationship. Because if you don't have you, you have nothing, right? So
Hence the title, the only
ex-
you.
exactly. So what happens? The narcissist may fake needing you, right? And they may end up with the point of saying, "If you leave me, I'm going to kill myself."
Mm.
Okay, so you don't fall for those traps, right? You're not responsible for nobody, for anybody's life but your own, and you can't help anybody if you're dead, right? So you have to be thinking of what is the best for me in this situation, right? So you need to take care of yourself. And that sounds terribly self centered, right? Kind of in a paradoxical way. It sounds selfish,
But
but
not
your life,
narcissistic.
but not narcissistic. Your life is all you have.
Yeah, because the decision is actually for a value-based move versus a totally personal move for I need more and more and more. It seems that recognizing it is the first clue or the first step for people in a narcissistic relationship. And if you have narcissism that you think is negatively affecting your life, like anything else, being aware of it and then seeking help.
Yeah. And again, I mean, a lot of the questions I get about narcissism usually are asked by the partner of a narcissist asking me, how do I help? Right. And I think that we need to start with the idea that you help first by you being safe.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, once again, Doctor, much appreciate your wisdom and your words. Very interesting topic. I think there's a lot more we could get into it, and as was associated to anger and rage and these things that a lot of people are feeling lately. Again, audience, thank you for participating, asking questions. Please like, subscribe, and share, and we'll see you again next week.
Yeah, and thank you everybody again. Thank you. We hit 2 million views in our YouTube channel with more than 100 videos and more than 10,000 subscribers. So we continue to subscribe. Everything we're doing it for you to gain the ability to live your life more adaptively and less destructively. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Good night.